All right, so in this section, we're going to be talking about bass. And I'm just going to quickly play from the drop so you can review and hear that bass. Sweet. So how did I make it? Let's start from the ground up. So let's look at Serum. This is where I made it essentially from scratch. And I'm going to show you the synth. I'm going to show you some of the mappings. It's very simple, but it just requires a fair bit of diligence in post-processing to get it to sound like that. And, you know, it is the devil's in the details with bass. It really is. So, first of all, we've got saw waves in one oscillator, tuned up, detuned essentially to 16 voices. So it sounds in its purest form like this. And the macro, the main macro on the filter, is allowing that to be modulated. But not only that, we've got a couple of mappings on the filter cutoff and the coarse pitch. So an LFO1 is when I trigger it, and I'll try and get it into the sweet spot. In fact, we'll move it over here. Like that. So when I activate from fresh MIDI, it triggers a new note, and you get, first of all, a coarse pitch adjustment on LFO1, and that is adjustable in amount. And that's just adding a little bit of snap. To the attack on the bass. And then obviously the macro here is like your general automation control, and the filter cutoff is controlled by as well by two automated, like within Serum, two shaped LFOs, and it just allows even more snap. And so you can get it to really, you can see the examples of what I've done here with it. It doesn't sound that standout in that form, really. But when you put it through a decent effects rack, it starts to come alive a bit more. So it really is that simple. Standard filter, cutoff, low cut, low filter, and a sub underneath. It's not 100% necessary. No effects. It actually sounds better affecting it outside of Serum, I found. I'm not always a huge fan of the Serum effects. Depends on what your doing, but yeah, I like to post-process, as I've mentioned before. So I've tried a number of things to get it to get that nice tonality from it. And the first thing that I did was use a trash to saturate it, the whole spectrum, with tape saturation. So we're going to turn it all off and progressively move through, and you'll see it evolve throughout. So, and particularly the note that we want to be hearing is this one, because that's the one that I've automated here with the general macro. Another thing to note as well, underneath it, I've put a sub. And it's a Lensman Reese sub. Could be anything really, but I liked his subs. They had a bit of harmonic quality to them, and it just gives the synth a bit more weight compared with the standard sub oscillators in Serum. So I tend to do that with a lot of my bass, is put like a thick Reese sub underneath. If you hear it without, just giving it a lot of weight. And it's really very much the sub information being allowed through there. So tape saturation goes on the top. Then I put a volcano on it. And that was more retrospectively to take off the top end after I'd trashed it, because we're going to put trash on again. And trash is brilliant for really evoking transient content in bass. So if you've got those filter cutoffs adjusting, you can get a lot of activity really like coming out of the speakers from it. So the top end is being pushed. I learned this trick from Joe Ford. He gave me some tips on both on Serum really, and also on in one of his tutorials. I learned about using trash in the right way, and the best algorithms by far to use with trash to not go too over the top are fuzz. In this category here, fuzz and positive, negative. They're really linear sounding distortion algorithms. So I use them all the time with my bass distortion. So big ups to Joe Ford for that tip. And yep, use positive on the mid-range. And you can see here I've used sort of a 30-ish% mix, 100% on the top, and, you know, push the drive a bit. And we can hear how that changes the sound as we move this up and down. It just affects a slightly different frequency area, and thus the tonality of the sound changes. And I find that trash, it requires those incremental gains, you know? You know, this one here is doing a similar thing, except I'm using slightly different algorithms and progressively beefing it up and driving that top end, driving the mid-range, smooth overdrive. Let's see if we can push that. It's very easy to go over the top with it, you know? So yeah, put the volcano on retrospectively to keep that depth to the sound, not let the brightness get too nutty. And I put it on prior because it sometimes sounds better than putting on afterwards. If you put distortion on and then try and EQ it out, the distortion's still there. Whereas if you EQ out prior to the distortion, or filter it out prior to distortion, it just cuts off that information and stops it getting from getting distorted in the first place, as much at least. limits the damage done by trash. So next stage is some delay. I use delay on my bass a lot, and it allows just a nice, clean, subtle signal to sort of space out the bass, especially if you've got those transients. It picks them up. Can you hear that? And you can just hear that like subtle, spacey layer spinning left and right, because the timing of each channel is different between left and right, and so you're getting this kind of stereo panning effect on the delay. It's very key to get use tape algorithm in Timeless, if you're using Timeless, and set your wet appropriately. Play around with the feedback amount, and you can do that for both the left and the. You can do that for either left and right, which allows you to really control like the way the rhythm happens between the two, because one's playing one rhythm, the other is playing another. So you can really control like the dynamic of. So if we turn that one up. So you can hear it in the background doing and then do it hard on this one. So you can hear that really going off on one on the right hand side. Really cool stuff, and it doesn't have to be applied a lot, you know, just a small amount can really add vibe to the bass and make it gel into the track. Next step, and this is not essential, I actually didn't use it on this one, but subtle bit of reverb can really vibe out a bass. Went for the Ableton one this time. It just has a certain sound that favored that particular bass at the time while I was making. I tried a bunch of different ones, like Valhalla. Sometimes Valhalla works perfectly. Sometimes Ableton's one is my preferred choice. But final bit of compression. And I've, you know, it's having the presence of the sub is really important here, because you can bring back any sort of depth that you've lost by distorting, because the more you distort those top regions, the less focus there is on the low end. So bring that sub back in, especially if you're a thick one, and just sounds badass. Bit too much sub on that one. Tried erosion, didn't really do much for me, so it's all about trial and error with this, really is. So a little look at the macros in more detail, at least the main macro here. It's really, really important just to stipulate this about this bass, is that you probably recognize it. It's from the sound of that is from Aviatrix, and yeah, essentially it's very, very sensitive to over opening the filter. It can just sound way too sort of plasticky when you go above a certain threshold, but if you keep it down low and then sort of go fairly aggressive with the distortion, you can get this lush effect from it. It's too much there, so keeping it down low is key for this sound. And then what I did was bounce that bass out into this. like so. And then the next step was putting that in the track, and it's, yeah, you can hear it's changed even more. It's evolved further. And I'll show you, I'll break down the processing on that. And I'll just kind of recreate as well what I'm thinking when I get a riff going, and the kind of riff I chose for this, and why, my logic to it, essentially. So we'll bring this in. So I had it like this. So my first thought was, let's see if we can get it down. Cool. It's really, really pushing it there. So I think, yeah, I found a sweet spot around there. And just started chopping it up. Simple as that. And that's what the beauty of working with a sample is. You know, whether that's from a pack, or whether you've recreated it, or whether you've worked from the ground up in a synth and bounced it out. So I took that, and then in terms of notes, just did the same with this one here. Push it across, boom. And let that one roll out for a bit. And in terms of like the note choice, that was based really around the actual bass notation of the original. So I just listened to the notes chosen by it, and I thought, let's mimic that somewhat, but then have our own, you know, have my own twist on it, so it kind of really plays up the spectrum. And I just try and look for things that have a bit of life in them, and play around with the pitching of the sample until it really responds well frequency wise. So if we just play the bass line again, the intro. So you know, it's a good riff that I really like it. So I wanted to follow the first two notes and then finalize on the same note, but have a fresh and just have a fresh like twist on it. And because it's, you know, our own bass, you know, it's got a lot more kind of grit to it, and the focus is all about that bass on the drop. I've processed it within the inch of its life. It's bordering on breaking up at this point in this tune, but it's just about acceptable, I think, for club play and, you know, to be released. I think it's on that borderline. And, you know, you hear a lot of tunes these days which have got that really push bass. So it is becoming, or it has become, quite accepted to have really like pushed bass, I'd say. So yeah, I thought I'd give it a go and just see how far I could push this sample. And here's the chain. So just progressively go through it. And one of the beauties also of working with this audio like this is, say you get like there's a lot of variation and movement in the riff, and to do that, I would place a clip like this here. Like that. And just try and get, what you can do is you can go zoom out, and then you can move that across. And in fact, if you put another clip in front of it, you can move this across like that. And then you can play with your start point, and you can move the bass to anywhere you like. And that's where the method of madness comes in back in the stage of making the bass, is why I like to bounce out. So you can chop it up, reprocess it, do what you like with it. And because it's a single long note, there's endless possibilities with what you can do with that. It's not like some pre-programmed riff, which, you know, there's loads of stuff you could do with those too, but it's just cool to have a long note. I'm sure loads of you will agree with that. And so and all it took was just to play one note on the MIDI keyboard and play around with a macro, you know, simple. So going back to here, you can really control how it flows. Like, what point does that bass note play from? And that's exactly what I did to create a slightly variant set of riffs here in the actual bass. Reverse that bit there. And yeah, just subtle movements that can be stipulated by literally just going like that. Or it can really, the world's your oyster with that, with a long sample. So next, let's look at the processing to give it that bite. So Ozone 8 was the first thing to go on it. I like to use this first to see if I can like subtly push a sound and then maybe go a bit more aggressive after. Bit of image control. It's quite a wide sound, and that is something to be mindful of, is that in Serum it was bounced out with 100 width on unison, and that can be a problem. But I've checked it in mono and it seems to be coming through pretty well. So, and because it's layered with because it's got a sub sample in it from the Lensman sample, and then I've added my own 808s underneath. Just a sine wave, really, from Serum. It's making sure that it's coming through. So, yeah, this is where it really starts to sort of toast it as more trash. So, you know, it's all in moderation, really, including moderation. So... This was quite important as well. I did 2 modes of mono stereo control. One back at the sample itself. So if we turn that off, turn the imaging off, and we'll turn off this image control here. It's super wide, and that is a bit of an issue. I found that it actually didn't sound as good, even in stereo, it was just a bit too wide for the track. So I put this imager control on here. It's very simple. Mono signal here and a stereo signal here. And it just reduces some of that sort of audible distortion that you can hear on the left and right, the far left and right. So that helps rein in the sound and make it just a little bit neater. And then I did a bit more of that here with both a low cut to allow the sub to sit under it better, and just dipped some of the side information accordingly. And it took me a little bit of a time to get that right. So, you know, me doing it live would be probably quite a long-winded affair, but it pays to think about your stereo image at all stages of the game in terms of your track and bass and everything, every element. So now it's sort of sounding a lot more integral to the track with the context. Just sounding like it fits into the mix a bit better. And then this next chain here, I think that Valhalla is adding a nice bit of vibe, but potentially risky, as it's adding some extra harmonics that are distorting. So need to be mindful of that. It does sound very vibey though, so I kind of feel like it's okay. And so yeah, this one's just doing a little dip for the snare. Not that the snare interrupts the bass content hugely, but because there's quite a lot of mid and top distortion on it, I just thought I'd dip the snare out so that we're not getting, and it definitely helps a bit with the overall distortion on the track. And if we go in here, I've set the stereo link to mid only, so it just dips the mid of the bass out when the snare snaps into place. And this section here is an audio effect rack that I've added with just the convolve function in Trash. And I've done that. That's weird. Let's have a look. Ah, yeah, I think it's, you'll hear that in the later section when I review everything as the track as a whole. So yeah, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, that is ultimately the bass. And there is some more bass elements as well to talk about as the track goes on, and the whole arrangement. We can discuss that along with the strings on the intro, and sort of bringing it all together and making it a complete track. But yeah, let's move on to the next section.